Good afternoon, everyone. It's a privilege to have you all here, to see so many familiar faces, and just folks that are committed their life to this work, community leaders, and so on and so forth. So here's our shared challenge today. We're here because we all share a profound commitment to making Durham a safer, more hopeful place for every resident. The challenge of violence in our community is real, and it demands not just concern, but action, smart, focused, and informed action. Now, as we work on framing today's event, I'd like to really make sure that this event is not just a public talk, but it's the kickoff to the first in a series of crucial strategy and learning sessions that are central to the city and county's joint comprehensive violence reduction plan. These sessions will draw upon lessons learned and evidence from across our country, as well as expertise and lived experience right here in Durham. Now, in this joint effort, the effort that we are embarking on is to reduce violence and save lives, and it will require all of us. I am grateful for the many partners we have in this work and want to recognize not only our city and county staff, but also our sheriff, our police chief, our district attorney, our superintendent of schools, as well as community leaders, among many others who will be crucial in this effort. Our commitment is united. The city and Durham County are working together to develop an evidence-informed, comprehensive, community-wide violence reduction plan. This is not something any community-wide violence reduction, this is not just, any plan, guys. This is actually something, this is not something that any one agency can do alone either. It is not something that any government can do alone. It will, in fact, take all of us. So our goal, our immediate focus is a significant, measurable reduction in gun violence. Now, breaking this down in phases, our shared learning. We are currently in phase 1 of our planning process. This phase is all about gathering the most effective, proven ideas from across the country and from across our community right here in Durham, and grounding our approach in what actually works to save lives. As I've said, Durham deserves a strategy that is thoughtful, informed, and centered on both evidence and lived experiences of our community. This learning phase will culminate in a community-wide violence reduction summit in the spring of 2026, where we will aim to identify and then advance the best suited strategies for Durham. Now, why tonight matters, tonight is the first step toward that end. It is just the first step. We have many more steps to take together and more opportunities to learn, reflect, plan, and ultimately act. Now, I'm going to introduce you. Thank you for being here, sir. Dr. Abt, here's a little praise about this gentleman here and the work that he's done. It's an honor to have you here. This is a man whose research and public service directly align with the disciplined, evidence-informed approach that may help inform our journey ahead. Currently, he's running one of the leading research agencies and programs across the country. I will say here publicly, we're not inviting Dr. Abt here to replace or in the place of our local experts. We have the solution to this problem right here on the streets and in the streets of the Bull City. Let me be very clear about that. I've talked to enough of you to know that the solution is here. We do a really good job of talking about it. And it's really hard for any of us to do something about it individually. This is an opportunity for us to come together with all of our lived experiences, all of our commitment, all of our passion, and help us work with a program that's proven, not doing it for us, but helping us work together as a community, filled with resources, to actually have a measurable outcome and a reduction of gun violence. I cannot take another child dying. I cannot take another trigger being pulled that does not have to be pulled. And I cannot take another person that think that they love more than the next. We all love this community. And we all want the same thing. We want people to be able to live and enjoy being able to live. So we're going to start in a measured way. We're going to start in a focused way. We're going to bring in the resources that are available to us. I appreciate this being free of charge. But when we finish this program, we should be able to see ourselves in a much better place than where we started. And I hope that everyone will assume this invite as buy-in, as a part of you being able to create it. We have not created a solution yet. We have not even created all of the parameters. That's what we're going to do together. And there will be people that say, why not this and why not that? If you have a challenge for this work, we're creating a space for you to bring that challenge and be a part of the solution. But this is work that's welcoming contributors, not just commentators. And I look forward to working with you all. Dr. App, so are you. Thank you.
Well, as we get settled, let me just say this. I'm deeply grateful for the invitation of the mayor to be here today. None of this works without leadership. And Mayor, I'm deeply grateful for your leadership on this important issue. And to all of the other elected, non-elected officials, and to all the stakeholders, the faith-based leaders, the community residents, the community-based organizations. I often say that violence reduction is a team sport. And the team can't be successful if the players don't play well together. And so I'm deeply grateful for everyone here. I'm going to do a presentation. It'll be about 35 to 40 minutes. I think we have at least 20 to 25 minutes for Q&A. So I would just say this is the beginning of a discussion. Please think about your questions, your comments, your critiques. I know there's a lot of expertise in this room, and I'm looking forward to having a really healthy conversation, and I'm looking forward to learning from you as well. Some of you might ask, like, who is this guy? And that's a reasonable question. I've been working on this issue of saving lives by stopping violence for all my professional life. I started as a school teacher in DC, working at a pretty rough high school, and my favorite student was murdered summer after our classes together. I went to law school and became a prosecutor in New York City, where I prosecuted hundreds of cases, but also a number of high-level violent cases, including murders. From there, after a brief stint in private practice, I joined the Obama administration and was chief of staff to the Grants and Research and Statistics Agency, the Office of Justice Programs, where I really started to see this issue from a much broader perspective. After 4 years with the Obama administration, and after having run a large national violence reduction initiative on behalf of the White House, I went back to New York and was the head of public safety for the entire state, running all of the state public safety agencies, corrections, police, Homeland Security, counterterrorism, all of those things, about 10 agencies, about 50,000 employees, about $4.5 billion under management. And that was very exciting. We got a lot done there. And there, too, we spearheaded a statewide anti-violence initiative on behalf of the governor. After that, I sort of transitioned into academia. I thought I was just going to go to the Harvard Kennedy School for a year to sort of take a breather and write and reflect and jump right back into public service. But that's not what happened. I got this idea to write this book, and 1 year became 4 years, At the end of that 4 years, my book, Bleeding Out, was published, and it's been successful. Not in a Michelle Obama biography kind of success, but more in a quietly influential, if you care about this issue deeply and you work with people in the field, eventually the book will come up. As a result of the book, I was able to put some money together from some funders and to start the organization that I run now, the Center for the Study and Practice of Violence Reduction out of the University of Maryland, also known as the Violence Reduction Center, or VRC. So that's just a little bit about me, and our mission, as you can see above, is really straightforward. We're here to save lives by stopping violence using science. And I think, sometimes organizations have a mission and it sort of looks good on the website, but it doesn't mean much. This drives our decision making. My deputy director, Amber Parker, is with me here, and I think she would attest that, it comes up every day, every other day. Well, if we take this path versus that path, what can we do to save the most lives? So now, that's a little bit about me and the VRC. Let's just jump right in. So, unfortunately, in 2022, gun violence became the leading cause of death for young people in America. And as you can see from this slide, it only recently outpaced motor vehicle crashes, also drug overdoses, and other things. And that's young people here is defined, I think, from ages 1 to 20. And, excuse me, this is a major problem, this is a major crisis. But one of the things that I often like to say is we don't really have a gun violence problem in the United States. We have 4 separate but connected gun violence problems. Some people don't think about it this way, but gun suicides actually account for more gun deaths than gun homicides. You can see it's 56% of total gun deaths. Gun homicides, which we're focused on here, is 41% of the total, and of that, community gun violence, the type of violence that we're here to talk about today in Durham, accounts for about 70% of homicides every year in the United States. Domestic gun violence counts for another 20%, and mass shootings, which tear communities apart and are horrible and tragic, account for less than 2% of all gun deaths, of all homicides every year. So just some context here. And so our focus is on community gun violence, the violence that occurs every day on the streets of our cities here in Durham and elsewhere. And there's the way we define this, it's defined very similarly by the CDC and DOJ, but generally what it means is it's violence that's happening in community settings, outside, in public. It often involves people who may know each other a bit, but they're not family members, they're not intimate partners. And it's the type of violence that sometimes we call it youth violence, sometimes we call it gang violence, we call it urban violence. But ultimately what it is the everyday violence on the streets of our cities that is killing the most people of any other form of gun violence. And it's occurring mostly between men who don't have a lot of opportunities or much hope. And they're often locked into a cycle of retaliatory violence where today's victim is tomorrow's perpetrator and vice versa. And overwhelmingly, this community violence is happening with guns. There's obviously no way to quantify the suffering of a mother who's lost a child. There's no way to cost out a young life's potential that's been cut short. But when you look at the overall social cost to communities, it's pretty devastating. Every single homicide is estimated to cost between $10 and $19 million in total social costs to the criminal justice system, to the medical system, to the world of corrections, the lost opportunity cost of wages and things like that, but also all of the intangible costs of fear and avoidance, one of which is quantified most directly in property values. We have many studies that show you have a homicide on one block in a year, the property values in that area are going to get depressed in the following years. And so multiply that by a block to a community, to a whole city. And what you can see is the incredible cost. And tragically, one of the most, tragically, we don't feel all this cost evenly. It really falls disproportionately on the most disadvantaged and disenfranchised among us. And unfortunately, it's particularly powerful on youth. I have this quote from a colleague of mine, Pat Sharkey at Princeton. Converging evidence shows exposure to violence may be a central mechanism by which growing up in areas of concentrated disadvantage affects the life chances of children. What he's saying in plain English is all the research that we're seeing is basically telling us that exposure to violence may be the number one thing that keeps poor kids poor. And so how does that happen? What's the causal mechanism, as we nerds like to say? The way it works is that exposure to violence traumatizes young people, and that trauma occupies their brain. And we have dozens and dozens and dozens of studies of the various impacts that this trauma has on young people. If you've been exposed to violent trauma, harder to sleep, harder to focus, harder to pay attention, harder to behave. And what do all of these symptoms ultimately accumulate in? It's harder to perform well in school. And what we see is the cumulative impact, the repeated exposure to violence is severely damaging our poor kids' chance to perform in school well enough so they can get those jobs that would allow them to escape poverty, get into the working class, get into the middle class, or even farther. So I want to point out that, we didn't get here by accident. We have to confront our nation's ugly legacy of racism that led to racial segregation, that led to the pulling out of resources that ultimately resulted in concentrated poverty, and that concentrated poverty over generations produces social dysfunction, like elevated rates of crime and violence. It would happen to any community that was put in those situations for that long. And that's something that you've got to keep in mind and keep in context here. But we also have to keep in mind that that causal pathway is going in both directions. What does that mean? What that means is that crime and violence are perpetuating concentrated poverty. They're perpetuating segregation. They're perpetuating racism and racial division in our society and in America today. And so what I would urge you, and you'll see the rest of this presentation is going to say, begin where you're at. Focus on the violence. One of the things that because of this context, one of the things that we hear is, well, if you want to work on saving lives, the first thing you got to do is you got to address poverty. First thing you got to do is get everybody a job. First thing you got to do is make sure everybody graduates high school. First thing you got to do is get all the guns off the street. First thing you got to do is cure racism. All of those things are incredibly important, but they shouldn't be thrown up as a barrier to save lives right now. The title of my book is Bleeding Out, and the message of the book is Stop the Bleeding. And so that's the urgency that I want to bring to this talk today. So a little bit about the science of violence reduction. Just so you know that this isn't just like, one guy's hot take on all of these subjects. Myself and Chris Winship, while I was at Harvard, performed a systematic meta-review. A meta-review is a review of reviews. What you basically do is you take thousands of studies. Those studies, as you can see, are summarized in systematic reviews. A systematic review of all the hotspots policing evaluations, systematic review of all the cognitive behavioral interventions. And then what we did is we did a review of those reviews. And this is a rigorous, methodical, transparent way of getting your arms and your head around an incredibly large subject. And as you can see, we synthesized the results of over 1,400 individual impact evaluations. But that wasn't enough. I think one of the things that I feel like, and I think the mayor really pointed this out, is that the best information comes in conversation. And so what we wanted to see is, is what folks are saying in the ivory tower, does it match with what folks are saying in the community? And so I went all around the country and I interviewed dozens of people with lived experience and firsthand experience of violence. Former gun and gang offenders, victims, family members who had lost relatives, law enforcement at the street level, not at the higher level. Anyone who I could talk to who had seen this issue up close and personal. And the interesting thing that we found was that while these different communities spoke about this issue in very different ways and used very different vocabulary, they were basically saying the same thing. And like any good systematic review, you have to consistently update these things. And we've just finished the latest version of this systematic review. It's not published yet, but I can tell you that this evidence has remained current over the past 5 years. So what did we learn talking to folks in the community and talking to folks in the academy? We learned 3 basic things. Number 1, we learned that community gun violence is concentrated, highly concentrated. In US cities, half of murders involve less than 0.06% of a city's population and about 4% of a city's geography. And so what that means is that when you're talking about community gun violence, you shouldn't be talking about classes of people, all black men, all, this or that, or a whole neighborhood. What you want to talk about is a very small network of interconnected people through whom this violence sort of flows. And so, in Baltimore, it's, could be 1,000 people. In DC, we've done a problem analysis, it's about 300 people. In Knoxville, where we're working, it's about 200 people. And in Memphis, where we're working, it's about 800 people. You don't have to boil the ocean to address this. And in fact, you need to be very focused and very targeted. You shouldn't stigmatize an entire community or an entire group of people with the broad brush of violence, because some of you have probably grown up in dangerous neighborhoods. And what did your mom or your grandma tell you? Well, go down this road, don't go down that road. These neighborhoods are not uniformly violent. And even in the most allegedly dangerous places, most people are not dangerous. So this is an incredibly important point. We can't stigmatize broad groups with this broad brush of violence. So now that we know that violence is hyper-concentrated, a few people, a few places, well, it makes sense that when you look at the science across hundreds of evaluations, the most focused, the most concentrated strategies work best. And we see that in policing. We see that in gang prevention. We see that in reentry. We don't just see it in criminal justice. We also look through all the public health literature. And the tertiary prevention, the focused prevention strategies outperform the secondary and even the primary prevention strategies. And now something that we often hear, and is a very good point, is, well, what about displacement and what about replacement? So, you focus on this one block and you shut down crime and violence on that block. Doesn't it just move down the street? 30 years of social science says that the displacement effects are actually outweighed by the benefits. There's something sticky about violence. And so what that means, it takes decades of disinvestment to make a violent crime hotspot. It takes a lifetime of trauma to prepare someone to pull a trigger. So these things don't jump around. It's not like drugs where you may incarcerate one drug dealer and you just create another opportunity for another drug dealer. Violence is different. Violence is stickier. And so these focus strategies are really important. The other thing we learned was that community gun violence responds to punishments and rewards. This sort of surprised me. I thought that, when we did this research, that we were going to see a clear preference in the science for, tough on crime approaches or soft on crime approaches. But we didn't see that. We saw really successful, aggressive enforcement strategies, and we saw some pretty spectacular failures as well. We also saw some really successful, very supportive strategies focused on, services and treatment. And we also saw some big failures. And so ultimately what we found is that you need both of these things. You need prevention to divert future offenders, and while you need enforcement to deter or capacitate the current offenders of today. And I have to tell you, I've been doing this a long time, dozens of cities here in the United States and even in Latin America and across the world. I don't know of a single city that just arrested their way out of violence. But I also don't know a city that just programmed their way out. It's got to be both. It's got to be carrot and stick. And think about your own lives. Think about your children. Do you raise your children just with punishments or just with rewards? No, we need to maximize behavior change. So if you want to get the most change, you've got to have both punishments and rewards. The last thing we learned was that community violence thrives on injustice. And I think we've all lived through this. What we see is that community gun violence is closely connected to legitimacy. And broadly speaking, the less fairness or the less perceived fairness, the more violence you're going to see. We saw it in Ferguson. We saw it in Memphis. We saw it in Minneapolis. And there's two large bodies of evidence about this: procedural justice and legal cynicism. Let's not get into the weeds of all of that. Let me just basically tell you what this says. What it basically says is that when folks don't trust the justice system, they don't use it. And they don't use it for perhaps its most traditional, its most fundamental purpose, which is the nonviolent resolution of disputes. So if you're in one of these communities and you don't believe that the police can or are willing to help you, and someone beats up your cousin, you don't call 911. You call your boys. And then a beating might lead to a stabbing, which might lead to a shooting, and the cycle has begun. Back and forth, back and forth. And so one of the things that's really important to understand is that we need to build in legitimacy to anti-violence efforts. You have to include residents and representatives of impacted communities every step of the way. And I think we see a pretty diverse group here today. And more broadly, we've got to do away with this sort of bipolar conversation that we're having about criminal justice in the United States, which is it's all about crime control or it's all about social justice. It's either Blue Lives Matter or Black Lives Matter. That is a false choice. And presenting the public with that choice does a disservice to the complexity of the issue, and it's not a good way to have good strategies because, as I said, you need teamwork. You need cops and communities working together. And that either-or framing that we've seen is really counterproductive. So how does this work in terms of the relationship between legitimacy and fairness and violence? Well, if we see poor treatment from law enforcement, from the justice system, from government in general, could be the family court, something else, that erodes legitimacy. And that lack of legitimacy reduces cooperation, as I said. That lack of cooperation is going to lead to increased violence, and then that increase in violence gives a pretext for further poor or rough treatment. But it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be a vicious circle. You can reverse it into a virtuous cycle where improved treatment builds legitimacy. That improves cooperation, that reduces violence, and that creates a momentum for even further improved treatment. And that's what you want. So we learned three things, and from those three things, we uncovered three basic lessons for effective violence reduction. Because community gun violence is concentrated, focused strategies are most effective. The strategies that focus on a small number of people in a small number of places and on few key behaviors. And because community violence responds to both punishments and rewards, you need balanced approaches. And finally, because it thrives in the presence of justice, you need fairness to address community violence in a sustainable and essential way. This is not up for debate. This is not one guy's hot take. This is thousands of quasi-experimental and experimental studies matched up with real-world lived experience, people who have stared down the barrel of guns, people who have lost people close to them. You cannot be successful in this area if you are not focused, balanced, and fair. And the mayor talked about, we're not here to tell everybody what to do, and that there's a lot of knowledge here, and that is absolutely true. There is enormous amount of variation in information and different things we can do, but these three principles have to be followed. So what does this look like when you're engaging that small number of high-risk people? And I think sometimes we talk about these folks sort of negatively. We say they're high risk. And they are at high risk. I don't want to sugarcoat things. But they're also high impact. If you take a young guy who is not at particularly high risk, but is in need for programs and supports and all of those things, you can help that young man. And that's a good thing. But you probably haven't stopped any violence, because that young man was never going to pick up a gun. But when you work with a high-risk individual who is at the highest risk for violence, who's part of a community that where there is a network of people who are involved in violence, and you change their lives for the better, you have a positive impact. So one of the things I like to say is these are also high-reward individuals as well as high-risk. So how do you work with them? Well, if you look at the successful strategies from around the country, they all basically do some version of these steps. Number one, you got to know who they are. You got to identify them. And then you have to engage them. You have to build rapport. You have to, you have to get their Instagram handle. You got to get their cell phone. And you got to start talking to them. A lot of the violence reduction groups that do this well insist on 2 or 3 contacts a week, so that you establish rapport. Because remember, these are folks who have been through hell and back. These are folks who have higher rates of PTSD than returning veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan. They're also some of the most deeply discouraged and disenfranchised people who have been let down by government and other things. They are not trusting people. They're going to say no 5 times before they say yes. So you have to engage them with relentless outreach. Once you need to meet their immediate needs, stabilizing them by providing safety and security. I often think that we kind of set up a lot of these guys for failure, because we say, okay, we want you to change your life. Just show up to our center at 8:45 a.m. on Thursday, when we don't understand that their housing is unstable, they're couch surfing. We don't understand that their employment situation is non-existent. They may not have resources to get there. And we don't understand that because they've been caught up in this cycle of violence, there may be folks out there trying to kill them and showing up at the same place at the same time. Being predictable could actually risk their lives. So we have to address those things by stabilizing them. You have to mediate some of those beefs. A lot of these guys have open warrants. Not necessarily for violent offenses, but for unpaid tickets and things like that. You got to arrange a safe surrender. Let's come in. Let's get you on a payment plan. Something so that they can start to show up in the same place at the same time on the same day of the week in a safe way. Once you do that, you need to treat unhealthy thinking, unsafe behavior, and unaddressed trauma. One of the things that we see is that a lot of the service delivery that we see out there is focused on delivering much needed services and supports. And that's really important, but it's not focused enough on behavior change. And what we find with this high-risk population is employment programs that don't focus on behavior change don't work. Arts and education doesn't work. Midnight basketball doesn't work. All of these things, what you need ultimately is you need to think about behavior change, because for these individuals, we often, the clinical term is hypervigilance. They can go from 0 to 60 in a second. And so you work with them to get them a job, and as soon as their boss criticizes them, they walk off or worse. They can't get along with a roommate in the transitional housing. They don't stay in drug treatment. So you have to start immediately thinking about behavior change, usually through cognitive behavioral interventions. And the good news is that these things actually work. And even the most deeply impacted and traumatized people can find their way back. Once they are in treatment, then yes, you need to layer on these opportunities, education, employment, and other things. But it has to be conditioned on behavior change. And then lastly, I don't want to be kumbaya about this. This doesn't work for everybody. And that's why we do need swift and certain sanctions for those who continue to persist in violence. We have to protect our communities. Place-based approaches are similar. It's not all one thing. Of course, we need more police operating in a problem-oriented way in partnership with local residents in these hotspots, these micro-locations. But we have to follow it up with that policing with placemaking. It can't just be law enforcement. And then we need to supplement that policing and placemaking with community building. And I don't mean community building in a broad, sit by the campfire and sing Kumbaya way. I think what you've got to do is, start small and grow out. What I mean is identify a particular location that has high rates of community gun violence, a particular housing project, a particular liquor store, a particular nightclub on a particular night. Create a sense of community around that, a micro community, a few residents, a business owner or two, local law enforcement from that precinct, some faith-based leaders. Build a community of 15 to 20 people and build from there, and then build another one, another one, another one all across Durham, and then connect those communities over time. But start small. And then finally, behavior-based approaches. People love to talk, especially I'm a former prosecutor. Those of us in law enforcement, we love to talk about, it's all about guns, gangs, and drugs. But what we see when we actually apply very broad-based strategies to those things, that we're not actually that successful in reducing community violence. Why? It's not focused enough. And so to enhance our effectiveness, we need to stop thinking of those things as nouns and start thinking about them as verbs. I know that sounds weird. What I mean is, when you're thinking about addressing gun violence in Durham, don't think about all guns. Think about illegal gun possession by the highest risk individuals in the highest risk places, a key behavior. Don't think about all drugs. Think about violent drug dealing by the highest risk people in the highest risk places. Don't think about every single kid who says he's a part of, who says he's a Crip or a Blood or whatever. Think about active gang conflicts, again, by the highest risk people in the highest risk places. And all of a sudden, what you're going to start to see is, my God, this is actually getting small enough to be actionable. This persistent, multi-generational, incredibly complicated thing, if we can just make change with a few hundred people in a few dozen places and change a few key behaviors, we can actually make a lot of progress. And I want to just say, I appreciate the mayor's urgency here, but I do want to manage expectations. We're not in the violence elimination business. It's a violent world. There's always going to be violence. We're in the violence reduction and violence management business. And what we want to see frankly, is we want to see violence so low that when it happens, it's as shocking as if it happened in the most affluent areas of Durham. That's our goal. There's unfortunately always going to be tragedies. It's one of the hardest things about doing this work. I mean, I see we have our chief here who's worked in law enforcement a long time. You can do an incredible job, and still there's going to be bodies. Those of you who've worked in community violence reduction have your stories as well. So we have to be resilient. We have to manage our expectations. This is one example of a strategy. I feel like I've been going on for a while, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. But this is one example of an effective strategy. The reason I think it's most successful is because it has elements of focus, balance, and fairness. So, to succeed, cities need to use all three principles that I've discussed today: focus, balance, and fairness. One or two is not sufficient. And you have to identify, implement, and coordinate multiple strategies for people, places, and behaviors. And so the question, especially if you've had some experience in government, is, is this too complicated? Is this too much? And I think fortunately, our experience shows that no, cities can actually do this. And with the right information and support, they can be successful. So now I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the VRC. We're one organization that does this work. Did I just turn this off? There we go. There are others as well. But we offer solutions to this issue by combining research with practical know-how. Part of our shop produces research, part of our shop does convenings, but the most important part, and the part that's most relevant here, is we actually work in direct partnership with a few jurisdictions to save lives. Important to know, we are not consultants. If we believe that we can work with a jurisdiction and we're aligned in terms of values, in terms of shared commitment, and in terms of our understanding of the issue, we offer our services for free. There is no gatekeeping. I haven't found a way that I feel comfortable monetizing this type of information. So we are not hired guns. We work with stakeholders who share our values and share our commitment. What are our guiding principles? Scientific rigor, of course, but also real-world relevance, lived experience, and financial and political independence. We are nonpartisan. The VRC wants to save lives in blue cities and red cities, in blue states and red states, and we want to be able to work in all of those places where there are willing partners. And also, we have no financial interests in anything that would compromise our independence. So any strategy that you see the VRC recommending, we have no partnership with those organizations. Our recommendations are simply based on the science. So what does it mean to be engaged with the VRC? We usually begin our engagements, which usually last about 3 years, with a practicum on partnership-based violence reduction. And we come to you. We work on-site, in person, for 3 to 5 days. And we bring together the highest level representatives of the city government, inside government and outside, community leaders as well, business leaders as well, faith-based leaders as well. And we train everyone in evidence-informed community strategies. We introduce them to the sort of state of the science, not just us, but other leading academics and practitioners. And then we engage in a rough plan-to-plan process. And after that, we got consensus on that rough plan-to-plan. We help remotely to help finish that plan to jumpstart implementation. So if you looked at our logic model, which is a wonky thing that organizations do to make sure they're holding themselves accountable, the VRC saves lives not directly. The VRC saves lives by making others, folks like you, better at saving lives. We're currently working with Knoxville, Boston, St. Louis, and Memphis. We're committed to work in Atlanta in the start of the coming year. Whoops. There we go. we customize these strategies, and we're working with partners so that in each place, the strategies that we come up with look different. What works in Knoxville, it might not work for Durham. And the other thing that we do is we also build on the local strengths. And we try to understand those. And we're going to be having lots of conversations in the future about that. But often, there's some strategies frequently, come up. Focused deterrence, cognitive behavioral interventions, street outreach, and police community partnerships frequently come out of these planning processes. Now, sometimes folks in research talk about process evaluation. And, did you actually complete the process? And so if you looked at what the VRC has done, in all 4 of our jurisdictions, we've gotten all 4 to agree to successfully complete the practicum and agree on a plan to plan. After that, they all actually published the plan. After that, they all actually created structures to implement that plan. And in all 4 jurisdictions, they're actually putting the plan into practice today. Now, I've been doing this a long time. If you told me that there was some awkward guy with this tiny academic institution who was working with cities and offering no money and got them to do these things or worked with them to do these things, I would say you're crazy. But that is, in fact, what has happened. We plan on doing a more rigorous evaluation, but for now, we have a simple comparison. What you see here is the rate of decline in violence in the cities that we've worked in compared to the national average in these places. One thing you may know is that violence across the country has been falling for the past 3 or 4 years. It's not particularly impressive to say you're working with a city and violence is falling if you're not outperforming that performance. And so what you can see here is in Boston and Knoxville and in Memphis, there's greater reductions than in national. Not in St. Louis or St. Louis County where we're working, although there are reductions. And then if you look at non-fatal shootings, we're outperforming the national averages in all of those things. That's not a rigorous evaluation, but it's the start of saying that maybe the VRC can add something special here. We've gotten some attention because of our work, and we've learned a lot. Local leadership is essential. You got to have the right people in the room. It's incredibly important to begin with analysis. You got to keep it simple. You can't boil the ocean, as I like to say. You have to build local implementation capacity. And you shouldn't go it alone. It's really worthwhile to bring in high-quality outside expertise. One of the things that I see cities do to be successful in this area is they steal from other cities. And then they customize that stuff to make it their own. So, of course, there is local expertise in this room. And of course, all of the solutions are in Durham. But don't be afraid to steal from other people. Because you can take that knowledge, customize it, make it your own, and become even more successful. So let's end with a quick look at the Durham data. The homicide rate last year in Durham was about 8 per 100,000. That's 3 above the US homicide rate. It's higher than similarly situated cities like Madison, Ann Arbor, Chapel Hill, and Boulder. But it's lower than some of our most violent cities, such as St. Louis, Memphis, or Baltimore. These are your homicides since 2018. And one of the things you can see is a significant uptick beginning in 2018 through 2019, a slight drop in 2020, and then a large surge in 2021, and then sort of not much progress one way or the other. And unfortunately, in 2025, according to the latest police data, we're up 13.8% in homicides. Compare this with the national numbers. This is unusual. The homicide trends are not the same trends national. And in particular, you saw increases in 2018 and 2019. There was a massive surge in violence across the country in 2020. You didn't see that here. You saw a surge in 2021. And then as in the rest of the country, most cities are increasingly, homicide rates are lower and lower. You're not seeing much progress here in Durham. Now, contrast that with the aggravated assault data and with the robbery data. And what you see, interestingly, and I don't have the answers, is that actually the Durham picture looks a lot more like the national picture. And what you see is steady progress on these other measures of violent crime. So some key questions moving forward. Step one is understanding the understanding the problem. What's driving violence in Durham? Who's driving it? Where? Again, who are the small number of key people, places, and behaviors that are responsible for this? Why aren't homicides falling in Durham the way they are around the country? And in most places, homicides and other violent crimes usually rise and fall together. That's not what we're seeing in Durham. We're seeing progress on other forms of violent crime. Why isn't that happening? Why is that happening in Durham? Step two is planning a solution. What are the strengths right here in Durham that we can build on? Are there any weaknesses or gaps that need to be addressed? And can we all come together in support of a plan that is based both on science and the wishes of impacted residents? Then, once you create the roadmap, you've got to walk that road. Are Durham leaders willing to devote the necessary resources to making sure the plan is successful? Is everybody willing to stay the course when, not if, there are challenges? I've never worked in a city where these things have gone smoothly with no hiccups or those things. There are always tests along the way. And are you willing to stay in it, if not for the long haul, but at least for the middle term? A reasonable expectation for homicide and non-fatal shooting reduction is that you reduce homicides and non-fatal shootings by 10% every year for 4 to 8 years. That may not sound like much, but after 4 years or 5 years, that's a 50% reduction in homicides in your city. And so, do you have the sustained commitment to keep chipping away at this thing? Maybe reduce homicides by 5% one year, 15 to 20% another year. Can you keep going? So the bottom line here is that Durham's challenges with crime and violence, in my view, are cause for concern, but not for panic. You have a real challenge here, but there are other places that face much worse challenges, and you have a lot of capacity, a lot of talent, a lot of heart, a lot of commitment here. So there's no reason to panic. In 2010, the Durham Convention and Visitors Bureau commissioned an analysis to look at Durham in comparison with other cities, and they said, oh, we're actually right about there in the middle. Durham can get back to that easily, and I think we can, in fact, do even better. So with that, thank you so much for your time. Happy to engage the conversation.